All right, hi everyone, and I want to catch up a little bit. So I failed to do a video on some of the earlier reading, week three's reading, and I want to touch on week four's. But some really important topics came up in chapter five, and a couple of them I want to hit. The most interesting one, I frankly think chapter five is the most interesting chapter of the text. I think there's a lot of personal application there. And the one area that I find particularly intriguing is asymmetric information. Remember, the title of that chapter has to do with the market has imperfections. It's not perfect. And we talked, for example, in your writing, you did a great job of your post that week about asymmetric information. I think you covered it pretty well. I want to just add an interesting observation about asymmetric information in terms of selling cars. I think I might have wrote in one of my posts this idea of signaling, that one of the ways the market operates is through signals. When we go to a job, how we dress, how we present ourselves, we are signaling to the potential employer various concepts or ideas or perceptions, expectations. We do that in the way we structure our resumes, whether we have a college education or not. It signals something. Sometimes those signals represent in the minds of the recipient a reality. Sometimes they're a distortion. Just depends. So in managing asymmetric information in the sale of goods, I often ask my on-ground classes how many have sold a used car, how many have bought a used car, and typically many have. And then I'll ask them, when you came time to buy that used car or sell that used car, where did you view the car, or where did you show the car? Was it from your home, or was it from the parking lot of some mega store or something? In most cases, it is from a location other than the seller's home. And then we talk about what is that signaling then? If the primary way that we have successful transactions is through the development of trust, then we want to send signals that increase our trustworthiness of that person that we want to sell a good to. And so if you're selling a car from a parking lot at a mega mall, then what are the signals that you're sending? You're sending perhaps signals that I don't trust you. I may be sending a signal that where I live isn't presentable, and somehow it might distort your perception of the way I care for the car. On the flip side, as you already can gather, if I show the car from my home, I'm sending lots of signals then that may impact the level of trust and expectation that the buyer has of the quality of my car. A nice kept car, or a nice kept home, is a nice kept car. Although it's not rational, because haven't necessarily done any investigation of the car at that point. I haven't had a mechanic review it or anything like that. But nevertheless, I'm sending signals to a seller that may overcome some of the issues of trust from the buyer. Now, I also think I made a note of this in one of my posts, that my thesis or my hypothesis is that sellers that sell goods from their home get a higher price than those that sell from a non-home location, simply because of that signal of trust that's created and will help overcome some of the asymmetric information challenges that the buyer has. So I just wanted to share that. The other one I wanted to share is regarding chapter 5, has to do with the idea of free riders. And that one of the imperfections of our marketplace is that people can have access and use things even though they don't pay anything for them. You know, you can go to a national park and you're going to have to pay an entrance fee. Now, that national park is open to everybody, but only those that are willing to pay an entrance fee get in. So there are no free riders in that case. On the other hand, you can go to a local city park where there are no entrance fees, have complete access like anybody else, but perhaps in your whole life you may have never paid any taxes that have gone to acquire and maintain that property. Same thing happens on the roads. We have equal access to the roads, even though we don't equally pay for their structure and maintenance. So in that case, then you have the free use of goods, but without the cost associated with them, and that's an imperfection. So you think about what is the role then of toll roads to address that imperfection. In other words, only charging those that use the bridge, the road, versus those that have other ways to avoid that particular path. So think about your own position as a free rider or not. If you are a listener or viewer of public television, public radio in your markets, then you know that you are regularly, at least a few times a year, asked to be a member. Well, if you choose not to be a member, yet you view and listen to those stations, then you are taking advantage and a free rider of that public, or if you will, private good that is sharing the public airwaves. And in fact, approximately about 30% or 70% of the viewers of those respective media are free riders. In other words, they don't pay anything to support their viewing pleasure. So those are two very interesting topics. And the last one that I want to address is very pertinent to today's world because we're in an election year. And it's this wonderful phrase called rational ignorance. And when I first learned about this, I thought, wow, finally I have a nice, legitimate, technical, economic term to describe my approach to the voting process. In other words, I'd go into the voting booth and I'd look at these measures, I'd look at these candidates, and I expected myself to choose one, but I had no clue as to their representation. I hadn't done any research, I knew nothing, and I was subject to name familiarity and any other, explanation for why I would choose to vote for someone. And this rational ignorance is a very interesting economical term because it speaks specifically to the challenge that we face in elections because it's very hard to collect a complete set of accurate data and information to make an informed decision. And so because we can't do that, or we choose not to do that, it's impractical to do that, particularly in all cases, with all candidates, all measures, etc., then we are rationally choosing to be ignorant when we go into the voting booth. And I suspect that just about every voter, in some degree or another, and it may just be specific to certain positions that they're voting on, candidates and so forth, I suspect we all walk into the voters' booth with a certain degree of rational ignorance regarding our voting, that are specific to our voting decisions. So now you have a nice technical term, and you can use this now at the next party. You say, I choose to be rationally ignorant when it comes to my voting decisions. Because I've done a cost-benefit analysis determining that the time it would take to become knowledgeable about the candidates and various measures, the cost associated with that is far greater than I'm prepared to expend in light of what I'd give up. And what I would give up is time with my family, television time, time for work, time for reading, other things that I'd be doing. Opportunity costs, of course, is the other economic principle. So anyway, feel comforted now that you have a nice technical term that's very legitimate to explain how you approach the voting booth. Now in Chapter 10, and this comes up a couple of times in the text, I want to comment about the idea of equality versus efficiency. So you put yourself in the shoes of a legislator that has received your tax dollars and now needs to decide what to do with them. Who should receive them? And he has to make a decision, or she has to make a decision. Shall I give those dollars to somebody that can take a dollar and turn it into $100 through innovation, job creation, etc.? Or should I give that $100 in equal shares to all of my constituents and let them do whatever they may? And what I've just described is really, in its most fundamental sense, the difference in a Republican versus a Democratic view of our society. Now, they're not precise in that way because the political parties are not are not always polar opposites, and certainly not in what they actually do versus what they say. But it's a very interesting concept to think about. Again, the economy, where we have consumers and suppliers coming together. We have the government walking around the perimeter of the marketplace, thinking, how can we help it be better? Recognizing that one of the ways that they go about making it better is through using our tax dollars to help the marketplace. Sometimes they do good, sometimes they don't do good. But in other words, to help the marketplace be better for all concerned. So they have these tax dollars. Now these tax dollars go to buy to make roads, to provide electricity, to provide security, but they do so much more than that. And when you think about tax deductions, and the notion that Warren Buffett only paid 17%, or somebody with great wealth had paid a lesser tax rate than somebody with lower income, you can, and again, I'm not advocating either way here, I'm just pointing out that that's a fundamental sort of view of, if I'm going to do something with my tax dollars, and a tax break essentially is tax dollars, I'm giving them as opposed to taking them, then what I'm saying is, Mr. Businesswoman and businessman, I'm going to give you special tax favor because I expect what you're going to do with that tax favor is be innovative, create products, create jobs, etc., and then that's going to benefit the market as a whole, and the market then will become better because of that efficient decision regarding tax dollars. So give that some thought. Let me talk now about chapter 15. As you may remember from my bio, I've been in banking and financial services for over 30 years and was a bank consultant, strategic bank consultant for the last 10. And I'm very interested in what chapter 10 has to say to students. And here's a simple couple of ways I want to frame the information in there, and I think some key takeaways. First of all, let's go back to the marketplace, and I've been using the position of we've got consumers and we have suppliers. We've got the laws of supply and demand that come into play between them. But in terms of financial institution, the role that they play in the marketplace is to bring together not consumers and producers, but to bring together savers and investors. That's their role. And that role is carried out by banks and credit unions on the financial institution side, traditional financial institution side, and by Wall Street in a traditional corporate manner, i.e. the issuance of stock and bonds in order to facilitate investment. So that's the first thing I think you need to fundamentally understand. And of course, they operate with a lot of different parameters and regulations, etc. I don't want to go into all of that. I just want to sort of frame that first of all. The second thing I think is interesting in the text, and we can see it on page, what page was that? Let's see, 156, I think. Let me get it up here, because it's interesting. It's well worth seeing. That was chapter 15. Yeah. On page 318. 318, you see this table here. And the point I wanted to make here is understanding the multiplier effect of money through the banking system. And this illustration does a nice job of helping us understand that. And all you have to do is follow the arrows. The important thing is the fact that there are two things going on here. One is that the Federal Reserve, in order to monitor the supply of money, says to, and the health of financial institutions says, when you take deposits, you have to reserve 10%. And the other 90% you can loan out, but you have to reserve 10%. And so that's what's in the center of this picture. All these arrows going in here represent the 10% that have come from the various deposits as they move around this flow chart. And these other arrows represent the amount of money that was available for loans. So for example, if you look at the first section up here, it's saying that a deposit is made to bank one, a 10% reserve is then required, so $10,000 goes to the reserve pot, and then the $90,000, followed by this arrow here, is now available to be lent to somebody. So we take the $90,000, we give it to So we give it to Bill, and Bill puts it in his local bank, which is Bank Two over here. Bank Two is required to reserve 10%, so the 10% there you see goes to the middle, and now they have available 81,000 to loan out. You can just see how this follows through. So that original 100,000 was loaned out to the tune of 90,000, was loaned out to the tune of 81,000, was loaned out to the tune of 72.9, then a 65.6, and then 59.50, and then 53, and so forth. So just one single deposit multiplied, and it's back. In fact, in the end, over $100,000 would have been, or so, excuse me, nearly $1 million would have been lent out as a function of just one deposit. So that's a multiplier effect. Interesting thing to understand about our banking system. In chapter 14, it talks about our tax system. And so the key takeaway for educated Americans is to understand the difference between a progressive tax and a regressive tax. So let's just quickly define that. It talks about this in the text. You can see it there. But just know that progressive tax is saying that in that structure means that the tax rate is progressively higher as income is progressively higher. So as we go from zero income to mega million income, the amount of tax assigned is progressively higher. So you'll see that. Comparatively, though, to a regressive tax in the United States is our sales tax, because it ignores income and simply levels it the same level of tax against any purchase that anybody makes, regardless of their income. So, for example, if someone makes $100,000 and purchases something, they're going to pay 8% sales tax in a certain state, and someone that makes $10,000 is also going to pay 8% on their sales tax. So 8% relative to a $10,000 annual income is quite different and less tolerable than 8% on a $100,000 income. Again, same sort of purchase, but relatively that is regressive and addresses more severely the financial circumstance for that lower income person. The other thing I wanted to share is in chapter 16, and I'll be real brief about this because I'm already at 17 and a half minutes, and I've tried to keep these under 20. And the last thing I want you to appreciate is monetary versus fiscal policy. And I hope that you'll read that chapter or those chapters pretty closely, because as Americans, we should fundamentally understand the way our government operates in terms of managing our economy, which entities have certain functionality, certain roles and responsibilities, and how do they carry out those responsibilities. And we've just been through a significant period in our lives that we all lived through where we saw and we continue to see the role of the Federal Reserve Bank in managing the health of our of our economy. And so take a close look at monetary policy, which is the purview of the Federal Reserve Bank, versus fiscal policy, which is the purview of Congress and the executive branch. And when you understand their fundamental roles and the tools that they have, you better understand as well about why certain things come to pass. For example, why the Fed currently, and if you read articles on this, Fed is on the fence as to when they're going to raise rates in order to make sure that the economy doesn't heat up and become more inflationary and at the same time not overheat. So raising rates makes borrowing more expensive, and then we borrow less, so that means our spending contracts. Companies borrow less, and as a result, the economy doesn't grow. And that's a good thing if you think it's growing too fast. Because if it's growing too fast, you may end up having a case of inflation where you have too much money chasing too few goods. On the fiscal, and so how do they do that? Well, they want to control the money supply. So the Federal Reserve, the rate used on bank reserves, currently 10%, they could make that greater, so banks have to reserve more, so it means there's less to lend, or they could shrink it, meaning banks would have less to reserve, more to lend. They can buy back securities in the marketplace, which was a big deal. Those are the two big things. On the fiscal side, what does Congress do? Well, they raise taxes, they lower taxes, they provide stimuluses like They gave us a tax benefit. Remember when they reduced the withholding on Social Security? It was about 2010 to 2011, and we got a little bit more in each of our paychecks because they reduced Social Security withholding by cutting it in half. We got a little bit of a check. Some of us, they had cash for clunkers. They had a little benefit for first-time home buyers. These are all tax dollars related, by the way. When they reduced the Social Security tax, well, there was less Social Security tax going into the Social Security tax trust. So anyway, I'll stop there. And by the way, again, last week's post, which is super. Now this week's posts are harder because we're talking about unemployment. We're talking about the economy again, a little less personal. So stay with it. Make that first post count. And then you've got some subsequent replies. So remember, you need to do one post. Then you got two DQs, two DQs. So make sure you do your major post each, and then you three replies to your cohort members with respect to any of the two posts. So make sure you do those. And I'll be particularly interested in what I learned too from you as you investigate unemployment as well as GDP and inflation, etc. So stay tuned next time. Anyway, see you in the post. Bye.